The House Committee on Education will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Colazar.
Here.
Representatives Churches.
Present.
Shannon.
Present.
Stone.
Here.
Weiss.
Here.
Glanville.
Present.
Conlon.
Present.
Edwards.
Here.
Wagella.
Here.
Green.
Here.
Markman.
Here.
Paquette.
Here.
Wenzel.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 14 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Glanville moves to approve the minutes of the September 19th meeting without objection, so ordered. Today, we'll be taking testimony only on House Bill 5021, which deals with changing the default retirement option for newly hired school employees. And so with that, we will go at ease as I hand the gavel over to Rep. Churches. Thank you, and thank you, members of the committee, for taking time this morning to discuss House Bill 5021. House Bill 5021 is pretty straightforward. What it does is, right now, currently in Michigan, if you are a new public school employee, when you enter in, you have 75 days to make a decision. You either can go into the Pension Plus 2 system or the 401k. If you don't make that decision in the first 75 days, you are defaulted into the 401k. And that decision, or at that point, it's irrevocable. What this bill does is, rather than default you into the 401k, it defaults you into the Pension Plus 2. Now, in terms of why this bill came around and why I introduced it, I've had a lot of conversations with school employees all over the state. And a lot of, I look at reasons of how can we address this shortage of employees that we have there. And I hear a lot of things. I hear a lot about making sure they have the resources they need. I hear about making sure they are safe, making sure that we are doing, make sure we have proper funding, et cetera. But another thing I often hear is, I don't like being in the 401k system. I wish I would have known when I started, because I was a first-year teacher in a new classroom. I got hired 3 days before school started. Had I known, I would have elected that, but I only had 75 days to make that decision. And I heard it over and over again to the point where I thought, well, this is something we should take a look at. So what this bill does is just says, if you don't make that election in the first 75 days, we're going to put you in the pension system rather than the 401k. I will be happy to take questions, but if you have questions of a technical nature about, long-term fiscal impact, things like that, Director Estelle from ORS is going to be following me up right after this. So I'd be happy to answer any questions other than that, though.
Thank you. Okay. My question is they have 75 days to make a decision. Why are we making the decisions for them? I know you say 75 days seems like a short time, but I know when we came here in the House, I was asked multiple times these questions, and they provided, like, this is this, and I guess it's, why is there a default? When you're getting hired, why don't you just make a decision, I guess? So when we're essentially then making the decision for them.
Well, that's something that we've done since, right? Because right now the decision for them is 401k. To your point, you do have to make an election. Not everybody does, though. I would say this, when we get that in the House, we do have a lot more benefit of life experience. If you look at a lot of people going to our school system, they're fresh out of college. They may not understand or know about retirements what you and I know through life experience. We've been at this a little longer. I think that, when you look at the numbers, 25% of people that make an election elect the pension, whereas 17% elect the 401k, and 58% don't do anything. They don't make an election. You can make the argument, were they aware of it? We don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens when we flip it, to see Is there a difference in what they elect? How many don't elect at all? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But ultimately, they have to go into something as far as why we make the decision. I can't speak to the motives of the time of when this was originally created, but it just flip-flops what the election is, or what the default is.
So just a follow-up question then, that 58% that don't decide, right now it goes into the pension, and
No, it goes into the
It goes into
401k.
the 401k. So then, I know this is a technical question, but then won't that significantly increase costs?
So it is more expensive to be in the pension system, but also keep in mind, more people you have paying into the system, the stronger the system. When you have less people paying into it, it's not as strong.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would this legislation do anything to create a path for the educational professionals that would like a choice at this point to elect pension versus 401k?
Meaning if they were already in the system for a couple of years and now they want to change
So
over?
if they were the default, but now they understand their options better.
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
I would be open to further legislation that would do that. We did discover when we looked at this bill that it could have created some issues, also some cost issues. So that would require a different bill. I would also argue it would probably require an appropriation as well to make sure that we're helping out our local school districts.
First off, thank you for bringing this legislation forward. Just a little historic. Well, first off, I want to say, I think we should only have a pension system. When I taught in Arizona, not comparable in pay, but you didn't have a choice. You were in the state pension, and one thing they did have was a pretty good pension system. So I just want to put that out there. But for context, when I came back to Michigan after my 5-year stint teaching in Arizona, I actually had exactly what you're talking about. I had 75 days to make my decision. And you get busy during the school year, after school activities, trying to just adjust to a new environment. And I was a veteran teacher at this point, right? I was year 6, I think. And I forgot to make my selection. So I got put in the 401k system. And I think objectively, the better system is the pension system for educators. And I guess I was wondering if you could talk about a little bit the history in Michigan. Have we always had two options? And when did the default become the 401k?
So originally we started with a pension system, right? But eventually what happened is we went through tough economic times in this state. We went through the Great Recession like so many other states did. And one of the things that the legislature at the time aimed to do, along with former Governor Snyder, was to create a hybrid system, which would be either pension or 401k. And the idea was that could ease the burden on the state and local school districts. And I mean, I'll do something that I would argue that I think we should do more of in Lansing is I'm going to give credit to former Governor Snyder. I'm going to give credit to somebody across the aisle because the system that was created with the Pension Plus 2 was financially solvent. There was no reason to close that or to default into a 401k. It was working. In 2018, a bill was introduced to switch the default to the 401k. And since then, what we have had is what happened to you. Now you say, well, where's the harm in that? Where's the negative consequence? The negative consequence is, first of all, it's very difficult for schools to retain teachers. To give you an example, if I have a 401k that's completely portable, I could theoretically stay at that urban district or that rural district for a couple of years until I can go to the wealthy suburban district down the street and get a job. Because I can take my 401k with me, didn't cost me a thing in my retirement, whereas having a pension encourages you to get vested. You get vested in that pension over 10 years, well, then all of a sudden, what happens is you're part of that community. I always tell people, had I not run for office, I'd probably still be at Airport Community Schools in Carleton, Michigan, where I taught. It was very close to some suburban Wayne County districts that made substantially more money. But I stayed there because by the time I was vested, I was teaching what I wanted to teach. I was coaching what I wanted to coach. I taught entire generations of kids, their whole families. I was a part of the community. So I would also argue that this bill very much encourages consistency, which ultimately is what's best for kids. I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, I thought that was great. Thank you.
Representative Glanville. Thank you, Chair. And one of the things I wanted to respond to our colleague, the first question that came out a little bit about why it's necessary to have a default, who makes these choices, that sort of thing. I'm looking at numerous reports that have come out recently around folks who just are not prepared for retirement. And how confusing the retirement system can be. As an educator myself, having worked in private, public, and charter schools over the years, I've had that portability. I've had a 403B, I've had a 401k, I invested in a pension in another state. Like, I've got it all going on. It's very confusing. And so, luckily I am one who is just like always defaulted to, like, I've always just done it, right? But for those people like Representative Wagala, I totally appreciate that we get too busy and to have that default where there is something, that we get into the system, I think is a wise choice to help move folks forward in Michigan so they're ready for retirement, years down the road when they're not maybe thinking about it in the moment. And I love the idea of the Pension Plus. I do have a technical question about the being vested, which I will leave to the next speaker. But yeah, I appreciate what this bill will do for our teachers and how it can be used as a recruitment tool and retention as well.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great discussion. This brings up a lot of things. Just as a point of reference, first of all, it's great that there are choices for our teachers. It's great that they have some type of a retirement conversation. Most of our small businesses across Michigan, and we have a lot, have nothing. They don't have the 401k or a pension. Pensions are almost a thing of the past because they're so hard to sustain economically. But I want to know, what is the flexibility with the pension plan if they change jobs under 10 years?
So that is part of the thing. To get fully vested in the pension, you need to be there for 10 years. Now, you put money into that. So when you put money into that out of your paycheck, that money is still yours. But to actually get the pension, you need to be there for 10 years.
So if you leave after 8 years, you get to take the money you put in?
Mm-hmm. That's your money that you put in.
Okay, so you get it back and you get to take it to Wyoming to teach.
Yeah, but
or
you have to
whatever.
start over to get vested in a new district. So let's say I
Right.
taught in District A for 9 years, and then I went, well, to get vested, you got to start over. So that is the part that you could argue creates a lack of flexibility, but I would argue, going back to what I said before, it creates consistency in a school district.
Oh, sure, I can see the positives in it. And one other question, the 401k, the way it's designed, is there matching?
Yes, and I don't know the exact percentage matching, but the next speaker can definitely answer that question for you.
Okay, so is there a vesting period for that too?
There's more flex. No, it's not like that. No, it's not like the 10-year vesting. No.
So there's a lot more
It's
flexibility.
different, and again, because I was never in the 401k system, I'll leave that to the next speaker to give you the details on that one because I don't want to get it wrong.
Okay, and just to be clear, whether we have the current plan where they get a choice within 75 days, but they can change it every year if they want to.
No.
Oh, once they
No.
choose, they're
No,
there
you
for
have
period.
75 days, and it's irrevocable after that.
Okay, interesting. But this would also give them a choice.
Sorry?
What you're proposing would also give them a choice.
Yes, 100%.
It just goes
changes the default.
defaults.
The default, rather than be the 401k, the default is the pension plus 2. But you still have that choice. But it is still we couldn't get around the 75 days issue without creating substantial cost. That's why.
More than anything, I'm just glad they get a choice. I think
Yeah,
more
and
than
they still
anything,
will.
people need choices to help them want to stay somewhere. Thanks.
Representative Green.
Thank you. So I guess I think of that, and I understand you want consistency, but at the same time, a lot of things happen right after college. You get married, you move, you have babies. So I know you want consistency, but then sometimes are they stuck then? Like they can't move because they've made this decision. They can't leave until they're vested because then they have to start all over, where a 401k, which we're already then, because we're not making them choose in 75 days or they automatically fall on this, they're kind of then stuck there.
I would say that, let's say they have to move in the first couple of years, which does happen, right? People get married, they have kids, etc. I would still argue that long term, they're set up better for success with the pension plus 2 than they are with the 401k. A couple of years, do they have to get started over? But if you plan on still being a teacher for 30 years and it's in the first couple of years, in the grand scheme of your life, that may not matter all that much.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Colzar. I was one of those teachers, so I got hired at a charter school, and then the week before school started, the Friday before, I got a job offer at a public school, and I was that 22-year-old person, and I was lucky enough to have parents that I could go and sit down with and look over retirement plans and health insurance, make comparisons, and I just want to point out, like, what you're doing is you're giving, in my opinion, maybe, and I don't know if you agree, the better option to our educators as a default if they don't choose. And for people who don't have family resources or mentors to lean on to help them make these decisions and thumb through this for their financial future and investment in themselves, this is providing that kind of cushion or safety net for our teachers, which is your goal to kind of make Michigan a destination place where teachers feel supported and looked after for years to come.
Oh, thank you. And I think the other thing I would say, it also, to me, it provides peace of mind. Right now, you know, as somebody who's grandfathered into the pension system, I can get a hold of ORS and ask them how much roughly will I get when I retire, and they can tell me. Whereas with the 401k, you can't do that.
Yeah, and and that's perfect. I've taught for 10 and a half years exactly, so I got just in because of that 10-year mark. So I would also argue that 10 years, it kind of keeps teachers teaching in districts, and it helps you make choices once you understand how it works. So I think this is really good at keeping our teachers in Michigan.
Thank you.
Representative Stone.
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on that. Some people have different perspectives on pensions, but the idea that this is deferred income, right? A lot of times as professionals, we talk about the income earned over a career as an educational professional, and a lot of times for lifetime security, we're not always making the highest income as a take-home pay. But it's often these deferred benefits that we count on in job security and a lifetime of security. So many families and individuals elect that professional pathway because of that.
Thank you. The committee will go at ease.
Okay, committee will come back to order. Next up, we will be welcoming to answer questions you may have, maybe with some quick testimony as well, from the Director of DTMB, Anthony Estelle. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, and thank you for the promotion, Mr. Chair. I'm Anthony Estelle again. Good to be back here, Director of the Office of Retirement Services, which is a
That's
agency.
what I'm at.
Yes. So, yes, I'll take that promotion for the moment. So, Chair, if I can just start off briefly, just to kind of clarify how the two plans work and kind of how it works for a member across the system. One thing that's important to remember is that these benefits apply to any public school that this member would be employed in. So they move with them as they move within the public schools. So this applies for both the pension and the defined contribution. Now, they have different vesting periods. On the pension portion, that's a 10-year vesting. But again, that applies to any public school. That's part of the benefit of MIPSERS being a system that applies across all 700 reporting units. So if that individual moved school districts, that benefit would follow them and they'd continue to accrue service and could reach vesting. On the defined contribution side, which there's both a component of that on the pension plus as well as the straight defined contribution, there is a vesting schedule at 2 years. The person's vested 50% in any employer contributions. So there's a mandatory employer contribution and then there's a match. 3 years, they're 75%, and after 4 years, they're fully vested in any employer contributions. So I just wanted to kind of clarify how the vesting schedules work, and that it applies to those employees across any public school that they're working in. So with that, I'm happy to take questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, and thanks for that clarification, too. Appreciate that. Representative Green.
No, I need to think right now. So think of the next one.
Other questions? Representative Wagella.
Just, I was curious, and since we have you here, do you have a breakdown of like 50% take this and 50% take this in terms of like what educators are selecting today? Are more educators taking the 401k? Or are they taking the pension? I would imagine it's 401k because of the 75-day.
I had that in my testimony.
Oh, maybe I just
yeah.
missed
It was,
that.
right, since 2018, 25% elected the pension, 17% elected a 401k, and 58% made no election at all.
58.
Yeah. Other questions? I anticipated more. One, oh,
Well, I guess.
okay. I'll hold off on mine. Go ahead.
Well, as I'm thinking about this, then, like, how do you educate teachers on what their benefit plans are?
That's a great question. So one of our challenges is to get in front of these folks as they're coming in. As a number of you talked about, people are oftentimes, entering the workforce, their first job. They're trying to figure out how to navigate a classroom, a school, all the different things that go with a new job, and especially a new job that involves educating our children. So as soon as we receive our first report that someone is working in the schools, then that triggers 2 notices to them. Our office reaches out to contact them to let them know about the election. And I should also say we give the employers information about this. So they also have it to let their new hires know they will be having this election option. They'll be getting information from us. So our office reaches out to them. Also Voya, who is our third-party administrator for the 401k, the DC side of it, reaches out to them to let them set up their accounts and online. Then we monitor at that point to see if the person has made an election, because our preference is for everyone. The ideal would be that we wouldn't have this 58% default, that every person would make an affirmative election. And we understand for some people, their life circumstances, their philosophy, their decision, a different path may be appropriate for them. We'd like them to make that affirmatively. The high rates of default have always been something that we've tried very hard to bring down, because we want people to be making an affirmative decision on their retirement. And we understand that that's very hard to have a newly hired 23-year-old who's dealing with all those things. So at the 25 and the 50-day mark, if a person has not made an affirmative election, we contact them again. We send them another message just saying, hello, welcome to the system. Want to validate that you received these couple of other correspondence to set up your account. We've noticed you haven't made an election. Here are your options. Here are website and resources for you. And if you don't make an election, here's the ramification. So we do try to make outreach to folks to try to help them and help them understand the options. We've got a very robust website that explains it. And unfortunately, we still see high rates of default.
Is it possible to require them to make an election?
That's the challenge. Yeah, it's. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there? No. Yeah, that we early on there was some exploration of how to do that. The challenge is actually more of a technical, and I don't want to dive into it really deep, but with some of the rules that the IRS puts forward in terms of where money can and can't go, you would almost have to create a third option that was kind of a treading water till the person made an election. And then we'd have to deal with the employer's retroactive adjustments. We'd have to deal with, getting money into their defined contribution account. So it was something that was explored back in 2012 when this concept of having the choice was first introduced. And just technically and from a legal standpoint, we couldn't come up with a pathway that would let somebody kind of float for that first 75 days, and then make the affirmative election. But in an ideal world, that would be the perfect, is that everybody had to make an affirmative election one direction or the other. Absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you speak to what you know of how HR departments for districts are presenting this benefit? Is it strictly the responsibility of the state and the department, or is a part of this on HR departments at districts? Are they providing a sign-off document as they're presenting your hiring benefits, or is it you'll be contacted by the department as far as your retirement choices?
To be honest, I think it runs a spectrum, which is part of the challenge, right? Every district operates a little differently. Their HR, their hiring processes are different. Officially, to make the election, it all flows through our office. So they couldn't provide the person anything where they would take an action and that would get them into it. That person does have to log in, create their account in our self-service website, log in, and make the election. Some reporting units are very aggressive about educating and getting that information to their members. Others are not as much. And so we see a wide range. Like I said, we do provide them materials and the direction to get these folks to our website. Let them know that they're going to be getting a letter from us as soon as we're reported. And they'll get a letter from Voya so that they know to be looking for these things, that it's not just one of the 80 other pieces of mail that somebody gets that sits in a pile, that these are the ones they need to open and get on. And then we kind of go from there. But we see a wide range.
Follow
Yes,
up?
please.
Does that 75 days start from the day you're hired or from your first notification from the department?
It is the hire date. We do receive notification that they're there usually within 2 weeks after hiring. So, because that's the first report that we get from the employer. But yeah, it is a counter from the date of hire.
Thank you.
Representative Conlon.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Okay, so just to clarify, was the 401k chosen as the default because it's cheaper to the state rather than more beneficial to the teacher?
I don't know what the legislative intent in 2018 to switch that, because in 2012, when the choice was first introduced, the original Pension Plus plan, so the original Pension Plus was the default, and the defined contribution you had to elect into. In 2018, that was switched around, and the defined contribution became the default. So I don't know precisely the legislative intent, but
it is cheaper, the 401k, to the state.
So I guess that's a kind of a challenging question. I know we've been working with the fiscal agencies to look at some of the numbers from a strictly from an employer perspective. The Pension Plus normal cost, and I don't know how familiar everyone is with the structure, Chair. I don't know if you want me to dive, how deep you want me to dive. So it's a 7.2% on Pension Plus in aggregate, and it's 6 or 7% essentially in the defined contribution from an employer perspective. There have been, since 2018, a number of legislative appropriations made to subsidize both of those benefits. That part gets very arcane very quickly. And as we were working with the fiscals and the budget office, there is overall, if you see the pendulum swing and more people go into the Pension Plus because of those offsets, there is a saving to the state and the school aid fund as people would move from the defined contribution to the Pension Plus, because the state is subsidizing the defined contribution at a higher level than it is the Pension Plus. From the employer, it'd be a 0.2% difference.
Thank you, and I imagine we're going to get those numbers too from the House Fiscal Agency?
Yeah, House Fiscal already did an analysis for us too.
Okay, good.
That you can look up. Okay, Representative Weiss.
Thank you. And thank you for your explanation on a lot of this. My understanding is that with the pension system, when you have more people paying into it, it creates more stability in the system overall. When you have more people who are drawing from it and fewer people paying in, there's more instability. And that sort of alludes to what you were talking about in terms of the cost to the state and the need for the state to kick in more dollars. Is that accurate?
Yes, certainly from a cash flow perspective, the retirement systems are structured to have money flowing in from people actively working, and then eventually money flowing out to pay the benefits to the retirees and their beneficiaries. So if you have a situation where we're on the edge of it with the Pension Plus 2, where you have a smaller number of people coming in, only 25% of the population, that can create cash flow pressures on the system, because the nature of a retirement system is you're bringing those funds in and then you are investing them to generate the earnings to eventually pay those future benefits. And that includes both people who eventually qualify for those benefits as well as people who never do, because the employer and the employers in aggregate are still funding that for everybody. And those funds are there, those assets can build up and eventually pay benefits. If you don't have as many members coming in, then that does create pressures on cash flow. The main reason right now that the Pension Plus 2 system has been okay from a cash flow perspective is because of the 25% of people who elect, it's overwhelmingly the higher compensated individuals in the schools
Yeah.
who are electing the pension.
So from what you're describing, it sounds to me like it's more fiscally responsible, would be more fiscally responsible to have the default be the pension versus the 401k, because it strengthens the amount of people paying into the pension.
In our discussions with the actuary from a stability perspective, definitely having greater numbers coming in, it actually provides stability. Yes.
Thank you. And I will say too, because I think the point that you made that it saves the money in the school aid fund for the state is important, but it is a slight increase for districts. There has been some work done through the appropriation side to try to offset the costs, those MIPSers costs for districts that are paying into MIPSers, because not every district does. And so we saw a 0.5% reimbursement in this last budget for those MIPSers costs, and I hope that we can continue to see to continue to move towards that path to kind of try to offset those costs as if more people are paying into the MIPSer system. That will slightly increase the cost to districts, but if we're doing a little bit to offset that, hopefully that will help them with those costs and also create more stability in the system moving forward.
Financially, yes, thank you.
Representative Churches.
Thank you. I wondered if you could clarify the mandatory waiting period. I think you said 75 days. I don't know, how was that chosen? And can that be changed? And if not, why is it so concrete? Because, I mean, you guys make the rules, so you can also change them. Right. So if this isn't fitting the needs of our teaching population and it isn't accommodating to their needs and say they need to make a change, why is that not afforded to them?
Yeah. No, great question, Representative. The 75 days is in statute. So in this case, that's yeah, yeah, no, I definitely, yes, yeah. I don't know exactly what the genesis of the 75 days is. I know in conversations with our employers, again, depending on who you talk to, some would support a longer. I don't know if there's any who back here would be testifying to that. There's others who would wish it was a shorter window of time. One of the challenges is that, and now I'm going to answer this assuming that this bill were to pass and become law, so that Pension Plus will become the default. Anyone who elects the defined contribution plan, that employer has to go back through all the pay periods that they've been reported and adjust and turn them into a defined contribution member. So the longer that window is, the longer time that employer may have to wait to find out what that person's going to be. And again, because we have such a large number of defaults, there's kind of just a general waiting to see what people will do. Again, we've increased our efforts to try to get people to get in and make that election, but the longer that window, the greater window of time you potentially have for an employer to have to make adjustments for a person. And especially in the case of the defined contribution, that could, for a person, that could result in some time where they weren't in the market with some of those contributions that they could have been. Now, ultimately, they're the ones who determine that by when they make their election. But quick answer to your question, it's in statute. It can be changed. The longer the window, the longer the time period that someone would have to make adjustments. I don't have concrete data for you here today. That's something we can go back and get. Anecdotally, what I've encountered in the past is that the elections happen either very much at the beginning or very much at the end. The middle period of time, and that's consistent with pretty much any kind of election, whether it's a pension election or anything else you deal with in life. People either elect very early or they wait till the last second and make that election. So that would just, unfortunately, the potential of a longer window is that you're just extending the window of time for kind of those last second folks. I'd like to say that we'd be able to do more interventions and get people to elect. We haven't been successful thus far because unfortunately, I think for people, it just becomes one more correspondence on the pile of correspondence for them. So
Why do you think that your default rate is so high, and what has your office done to change that? And do you think this legislation is kind of trying to help you do that?
So I think the default rate is so high because of human inertia. I mean, it's the same reason why most of us here know we should go in and cancel the services that we have for different streaming things that we haven't watched because we got a show a year ago and we know we should go do it, and we set the notice or we set that there, and then we just never get to it. So behavioral finance talks about inertia a lot. We try to harness that in a positive way in terms of how we've structured various parts of the plan. So the 401k, all the plans, everyone defaults at a level to get the full match so that they don't have to make a decision there. We have an auto escalation called our small steps, which will increase their contributions year over year. Most people know they need to do that. It kind of gives them a nudge and does it for them. In terms of efforts we're making, we are looking for whatever pathways we can to get more people to come in and make an affirmative election. We do not like people defaulting. Switching this around, I think just accomplishes what the chair talks about from putting more people into the pension. And I can say that when the default was switched, we did immediately and have continued to see escalations for people, kind of the story that the representative was sharing of people who found themselves in the defined contribution plan. We've had a number of administrative hearings at our board level. We've even had people appear at the board. We've even had parents of employees appear at the board advocating for people who defaulted into the defined contribution. So I think that from that lens, it will result in more positives.
Representative Glanville.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate what you said about behavioral inertia. For any of us who have tried to get somebody else to do something like trade out their laptop, you know what it's like, to try to chase that down. And as the school year progresses, again, the paperwork and just having that hanging over you. So I'm really pleased to see, and I know these maybe aren't 100%, but it looks like, amazingly, teachers, administrators, school leaders are all on board with this and think it's a good idea. So I'm looking forward to hearing for sure where people fall, if there's any further concerns. But it sounds like everybody's on board with this. I think we all agree that we want our teachers in a retirement program where they don't have to. I think, speaking to the 58%, I mean, how many of it's just the path of least resistance. If I know I'm going to get a retirement plan and I don't particularly care, like, I'm good. Like, give me the 401k or give me the pension. Maybe I'll regret my choice later, but that's on me. But I'm still getting a retirement. Either way, my teachers are still being taken care of, and if they are alert enough to be making the decision. And that's why I think it's important that this default switches so that they are getting the best. And if they move within 10 years to another district, they can continue. I love that. I was wondering, that was my question in the beginning, was the vestiture piece, that you can, the pension is mobile for you. And so I think this is a win-win, and I'm happy that we're bringing this legislation forward.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Green.
Do you know how many teachers leave before the 10-year vesting?
I don't have that number offhand, but we certainly track that through our actuarial process. We know the rates of departure.
Representative Johnson.
It's like reading my mind. In a perfect world, I'd love for everybody to have a pension, and I'm glad our teachers get to still have one. I think we got to think about the cities, counties around the state and throughout the whole country that have almost gone defunct. In some cases, some of those receiving pensions have not been able to receive them. This has to be financially sustainable, so we're going to have to keep an eye on this. It cannot be unfunded. Therefore, all the years that a teacher has taught and expected a pension, and we've seen this with the city of Detroit, where people are sweating it out. Am I going to ever get my pension after 20, 30 years of working there? Do you have any comment on that, on what we've seen in the state, so far?
Yeah, it's a great question, Representative, and it's certainly something that it's the core of what we do, is to work with the legislature and work with the budget office to ensure that the system's adequately funded. The Pension Plus 2 plan has a number of mechanisms that really, I think, lead to long-term stability. The nature of it being a hybrid plan, being both a pension and a small defined contribution. The benefits that are provided are relative to other pensions more conservative. You can't draw them till you're 60. and it uses a 5-year averaging for the final average compensation, which results in a more conservative benefit. There's a risk-sharing component so that the normal cost, the cost of accruing the current year's benefit, is shared equally between the employees and employer. And in the event that unfunded liabilities do arise, that risk-sharing component is present as well. So in this regard, everybody has some, I guess the term is skin in the game in terms of the funding and financing the system. I know that some of those components aren't always popular. To answer your question, though, they are things that give stability going forward as we encounter. The Pension Plus 2 component of MIPSers is just shy of 106% funded right now. So we're in the right place and on the right path with that plan. So thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, and then I'm going to cut it off after that because we do have another person testifying. So the next question, we're going to go to Zoom to Representative Paquette.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just quick question based on that notion, actually, is, how, if this legislation was implemented, how would it have impact on our estimates? You mentioned we're on the right track. I think that some of the reforms put in place were very helpful, especially because we were on the wrong track a few years ago. So what kind of impact, if this legislation was implemented, would it have on the estimates of our unfunded liabilities? And then the second piece would be, could you just give a breakdown of, say there's a teacher, teaches 9 years, they get corralled with that 58% into the tier 1, but they move to another state or they stop teaching. Could you just give an easy breakdown of what that would look like from tier 1 versus if they were in tier 2?
Sure. So in terms of the first question, again, a number of the changes over the years have resulted in a lot of improvements and stabilities in the plan. If there are a greater number of individuals coming into the Pension Plus 2 system, let me say it in a different way. The actuary is expecting everyone to be in the Pension Plus. The system is not designed to only support 20% of the employees, 50%, 75%. It's designed to support all members coming in. So if we see an increase with this, which we will, because the default in our past behavior has shown that most people end up in the default, that won't cause any stability issues with the plan. In terms of the second question, so if you have a public school employee who's at 9 years and they decide to leave the Michigan Public Schools, they have a couple of options. First of all, they can leave their contributions on deposit with the system, because if they return later, they would then pick up and continue to accrue service and could vest in a benefit. They also would have the option, if they wish, that they could take a refund of their contributions. It's one thing I do want to highlight. This isn't like a 401k. Those contributions are flowing overall into the pension trust. By statute, we keep track of those contributions and we credit interest to those, but the person doesn't really have an individual account. It's not like they have a bank account with us or anything like that. But we would then credit them their contributions and the interest earned on those contributions. By board action, those contributions actually can't lose money. They can earn up to 6% interest depending on the returns of the system. So that person could then take a refund of those contributions, roll them into an IRA, into a 401k. If they're moving to another employer, they could roll those funds there. And they could also leave them on deposit because they have 9 years of service in the event that they returned to the Michigan Public Schools at a later date.
Okay, thank you. Representative Stone.
Thank you. All this conversation prompted another question as far as, is this 75 days from your hiring into Michigan's educational system, or is it from the time you're hired into a district? If I switch districts and I get hired into a new district, does that give me another opportunity to make a different election?
It does not. It's just your first hire.
Okay.
Director, thank you so much for answering all of our
Chair.
questions.
No
Really
problem.
appreciate you making time.
Thank you all.
Okay, next up we have Todd Tennis from Coalition for Secure Retirement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but I wanted to clarify a couple of things that were asked during your presentation, sir, and then Mr. Estelle clarified most of those. So I'm just going to quickly give an overview of what's happened in the last 20 years with school pensions in Michigan. So up until 2010, all public school employees who were hired by a MIPSERS member, they were put into a DB plan, a defined benefit plan. And in 2010, that changed. The Pension Plus hybrid system was created. And for the first 2 years, there was no option. All new employees were put into that plan. In 2012 was the first time that the option was created to essentially allow a new hire to choose. At 75 days, you could choose either the hybrid or the DC plan. And then, but the default was if you didn't make that option, which as we've heard, most people didn't, and that hasn't changed over the years. That percentage of people who don't opt has stayed about the same, and they were defaulted into the hybrid plan, and then that changed in 2018, and the default was flipped to the DC plan. The Coalition for Secure Retirement represents both active and retired employees who in the public schools, in the state of Michigan, and elsewhere, and we opposed that change then on the basis that because most people were not making that option, it was going to flip a lot of folks into what we consider to be the worst option for a long-time employee. The only type of employee where a defined contribution option, in this case, really makes sense is someone who's not planning on making a career in education, that they're planning on doing this for a few years and then going somewhere else. Anyone who is planning on staying is going to do better, and I shouldn't say anyone, 99% of people who are planning on staying will do better under the hybrid plan. And Mitch Bean, former director of the House Fiscal Agency, did a study on this about 8 years ago, and he found that the investments into either a DB plan or even the hybrid, in terms of total benefits that a retiree would get, is about 2 to 1. So for the same investment the state's making, and as you heard Mr. Estelle say, we're paying about the same for each system, just a fraction of a percentage difference. But the benefit to the employee is about twice as good after they retire in the hybrid plan than it would be in the DC plan. And so the other thing that we've seen in the last few years is a massive shortage of educators. And we believe, we testified back in 2018 and even before that as some of these other changes were made, that we feared that this would make it, the proponents of the DC plans would come in here and say that the great thing about these is that they're portable and people can just take them with them and leave. And oh my gosh, that's exactly what they did. And now we're wondering, why can't we find any folks who want to stay in teaching? Representative Paquette last session had a hearing to try and figure out why so many educators were leaving after that 5-year point. One of the things that was pointed to is that there's no longer that incentive to stick it out for that 10-year vesting period. And I think most of the folks who are on this panel who have had teaching experience, at least this is what we hear from our members, will tell you that first 5 to 10 years is the hardest. It's when you're really questioning your life choice on whether you want to stay and be an educator. And not having that incentive to stick it out, I think, is having a real impact on staffing. And so, because I also believe, and what we've heard from our folks is by the time you hit that 10 years, you're kind of getting your groove, you're figuring it out, and you're thinking, okay, this is something I can do as a career. And that's what we had for most of the last half century, is people who made a career out of this, and we're just not seeing that right now, and we're paying for it by having to pass bills that allow folks to come out of retirement and go back into teaching because superintendents and school managers just cannot find enough people to get into the classroom. So we believe this is a good start. This bill is a step in the right direction. We think that we should go further eventually, and we'll be coming back to this body and other members other of the legislature over the next year to talk about expanding retirement opportunities for school employees, for state employees, for others, because we're not just seeing this staffing crisis in education. We're seeing it in the Department of Corrections. We're seeing it in the Department of Health and Human Services. We're seeing it across the board as we have diminished retirement benefits in terms of defined benefit pensions. We have diminished the desire of individuals to make public service a career. And so we would like to change that.
Thank you. And we do have one question from Representative Stone.
Sure.
I think you already kind of touched on this, but I just want to circle back around. Is anyone doing correlation or causation around overall compensation, including retirement benefits, to why we're losing our educational professionals, people not electing to go in, people opting out?
Yes, the National Institute of Retirement Security has conducted several studies, most recently in Alaska, and the Alaska legislature is looking at reopening their defined benefit pension system for public employees because staffing issues. They're seeing it as a direct cause, or at least one of many causes, but it's certainly a significant one for the staffing shortages they're facing in that state. And we're hoping that national organization can look at Michigan as well.
Thank you. It's helpful to know that there's data to support this and it's not just theoretical.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Rep. Churches.
I want to thank you. It feels as though you were like very authentic and genuine in the information that you delivered to us. And
thank you.
It makes me feel like what I have experienced my entire teaching career is valid, even though I didn't have the data to support it. My first year teaching was in 2011, pretty much right at the beginning of all of the things of teachers going through these tough situations. And I didn't trust the state of Michigan. I didn't trust other people. I didn't know them. They're not an entity that would sit down with me and make me feel like, oh, this is a really easy thing to talk about. But the people I did trust were my family members, or mostly veteran teachers, who would reiterate to me, like, the 90s was such a great time to be a teacher in Michigan. And you're not even going to get these things when you retire, and they would say these things that would deflate me as a young teacher, and it really impacted the morale of the younger generation of us. And I think that's something that there's no data to prove that, but it's something I felt every day, and it got worse over time. And that's why I'm here today. And I'm one of those teachers who stuck it out the 10 years because it was fiscally responsible, but it did keep me there a little bit longer. So thank you for sharing your input because it aligned with my experience.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Okay, we have a couple cards to read in. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Janelle Mansfield, AFT Michigan. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Mike Latvis, Wayne Risa. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Dr. Cheryl Kennedy, Michigan Department of Education. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Royce Hum, Michigan Association of Retired School Personnel. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Andy Newman, Michigan Education Association. I want to thank all committee members for the great discussion, and no absent members. So there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.